Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Great. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Climate Change and Nature Recovery Strategic Transformation Committee. We are online only today, which is very in keeping with our first substantive agenda item on the Regional Transport Plan. If you are not speaking, if I could ask you to have your mic on mute, that would really help us. Thank you. So I'm going to do a lot of flicking between screens because we're on online. So the first agenda item, have we had any apologies for absence?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And with apologies from Councillor Andrew Stevens.
Lovely, thank you. And are there any disclosures of personal or prejudicial interest for anybody to make? No, I'm not seeing any. You are across two screens on my setup, so if you're waving at me and I haven't seen you, please just unmute and speak. Otherwise, I'll assume I can carry on. Okay, lovely. I hope everybody's had a chance to have a look at the minutes of our last meeting. Are we happy that they are a true record? I could get some.
Yeah, true record.
Yeah, thank you, Maya. And Hannah, that's great. Yeah, looks like everybody's happy. Okay, so we'll move on then to our first substantive item, which is the South West Wales Regional Transport Plan. I think Councillor Stevens would have given a brief introduction, but he is sadly not with us. So am I handing directly over? I'm looking at Stuart. Who am I handing over to?
I'll bring, hold on. I think Lee must have dropped out on there. I was just going to say I'll bring Lee in when he's joined back in. Lee,
while we're giving Lee a second, I'll just take a minute to welcome our newest member, Councillor Evans. Hello, thank you for joining us. I can see that Lee is in now.
Sorry, Lee, can you? Can you hear me, Lee? Sure what's happening with the technology here.
Councillor Hopkins is having issues joining us as well.
Lee, can you hear now?
I've just managed to join, but I'm on my phone. My iPad won't allow me to. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us. We're having slight technical issues with our presenter for this agenda item as well, which is a bit of a problem. Is there anyone else from the team who's able to give us a bit of the background while we give Lee a minute to sort out his technical problems?
I can talk around for a bit, Rebecca, if I can.
That would be great.
Because my seems to be playing up as well. Everything's very jittery.
Okay, over to you, Matt.
Yeah, so as we've discussed before at various committees of the last 12 months, in a couple of years ago, the Corporate Joint Committee with South West Wales was formed, aimed to sort of improve coordination across transportation, land use, economic development, and energy is the fourth thread. We've got already approved regional plans for economic development and energy, and we've been working on a new regional transport plan for the last just a bit more than 12 months. That focuses on the period from 25 to 30 and takes over from the previous joint transport plan, which is now expired. Essentially, the plan is going to determine sort of high-level policies to help us deliver the Welsh transport strategy, to help meet the needs of the people who live and work and travel through the region. This also will also include a regional transport delivery plan, which will identify a priority list of schemes within each of the 4 regional areas, and it will be the basis on which we apply for transport funding over the next 5 years. So as I touched on then, we were talking about how we're going to deliver the aims of the Welsh Transport Strategy, which has obviously 3 key themes. Firstly, to bring services to people, to reduce the need to travel, to allow people and goods to move easily from door to door, and to encourage people to make the change to more sustainable transport modes. Oh, here's Lee's in. Can Lee hear me?
Yes, hello, Matt. Good afternoon, Chair. Apologies for the technology there.
Just been trying off the top of my head to remember what regional transport planning is all about. That wasn't too bad, was it, Stuart?
Well, that's fine. I think, Lee, Matt's just started giving a background introduction in terms of on there about the key aims and objectives of the regional transport plan. So if you want to continue on, I think we just got to the sort of the overarching sort of 3 aims on there. So do you want to go through and then give a position of where we are, and obviously the position we are in terms of the consultation and the next stages really. So I suppose the update of what it's about, where we are now, and what lies ahead. Thanks, Lee.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart, and good afternoon, Chair. As I say, apologies for the technology issues at my end. I think that they were self-inflicted. They were operator fault rather than anything to do with the call. As Matt was saying, obviously, regional transport plan, quite a key document for the council, but also for the 3 joining council as well. Obviously, we've talked you through the priorities before in terms of quite closely following the Welsh Transport Strategy 2021. We need to do that simply because obviously Welsh Government are ultimately going to be the funding body for this. So got to follow their guidance quite closely. However, within the region, we have identified 4 internal priorities, as it were. Firstly, looking at regeneration and economic development. Secondly, looking at the tourism offer across the region and how the transport system caters to that. Looking at some of the rural issues as well, and I think we're also quite cognizant that applies to Swansea and Neath council areas, as well as the more obvious Pembrokeshire coast and some areas of Carmarthenshire. Certainly there are a number of rural areas that we need to cater for across the region. And the final pressing issue for us is obviously the environment. We see lots of challenging matters, particularly around air quality. We've got some examples of coastal erosion that are affecting the transport network quite significantly now. Climate resilience, of course, is key in terms of looking after the assets moving forward. So those are our sort of internal priorities as it were in the region, and the words of the regional transport plan reflect that, with this overarching view of following the Welsh Transport Strategy quite closely. I think it's important, as Matt has probably said already, there's 2 elements to what's out for consultation at the moment. Firstly is the regional transport plan itself, which is principally a policy document, for want of a better description. It sets out roughly where we are now in transport terms, where we want to get to, and a policy framework to allow us to achieve that. There is also out for consultation a very long list of schemes that constitute the delivery plan, so the regional transport delivery plan. So importantly, within that, there are a number of schemes that have been drawn up in collaboration with officers in Swansea, and similar lists with the other authorities. There is also a regional list of schemes as well, and those are those priority schemes that we see coming forward on a pan-regional basis, where, for instance, if Swansea are doing something, let's say the active travel space, clearly the other 3 authorities are doing things within that space as well, and it makes sense to bring that together into a regional programme. Very importantly, as well as those local and regional schemes, there is also what effectively we've termed third-party schemes, and those are the schemes that are particularly critical but are not deliverable by either us as Swansea or through the regional machinery. So those are the schemes that are the trunk road and rail schemes predominantly, that are affected by Welsh Government, Transport for Wales, South Wales Trunk Road Agency, etc. So those are those genuinely big ticket items on the M4, the rail network, and some of the trunk roads around Swansea as well. So we do have that list there. And what we're doing there, we're trying to, although it's not been formalised in the approach yet, the Welsh Government are suggesting that as the National Transport Delivery Plan expires in 2027, we should be putting our best foot forward to say what we'd like to see in any further iteration of that. So there's a bit of a subtext to that that sort of third party stroke national list that we're looking at as well, that it could become a bit of a lobbying tool in effect for the next round of the National Delivery Plan. That's where we've got to. I did have some stats on the consultation, and obviously it's very early doors yet. We only started Monday afternoon, but on Wednesday we'd already had 213 responses. So people were quite quick out of the blocks to start responding across the region. No real statistics on that yet, as you would expect. It literally is just a number that's been drawn up from the number of responses. So early indications to the consultation are that it's doing well. Clearly, we need to delve into see the response rate continuing at that level. I think we'd like to see that, and also to start to understand the responses in a little more detail. Obviously, we do have some views that came forward in the consultation over the summer as well, but clearly we're now actually consulting on the real plan and the actual policies now, not the principles of it. So clearly, I think there'll be more engagement, and particularly now there's a list of schemes up for discussion as well. I think that will create quite a number of responses. So have I covered everything there, Matt and Stuart? I mean, that was a bit of a general ramble around the where we are, I guess. We go in the consultations for 8 weeks, so we've got 7 weeks left at the moment, and then obviously there's quite a rapid exercise to interpret that at the end. Have I covered everything there, Stuart and Matt, Chloe? Apologies if I've not.
I think certainly from my perspective, whether Chloe or Matt have got anything. Obviously, when we get to the end of the consultation period, it's a case of drawing this up into the final regional transport plan, which is for submission towards before the end of July to Welsh Government, and then it becomes the adopted policy document for the next 5 years, and it will also have the intended the delivery plan for the schemes, which will form the basis of our kind of bidding platform for Welsh Government funding. So I guess the only other thing is there's a task going on in parallel, which is a grants modernisation exercise, which is looking at how the allocation up till now, the allocation of grant funding has been to each local authority, and the Welsh Government are considering how this could possibly be hopefully streamlined and sort of involving the CJC and how that role could play out over the the 5-year funding window. So understanding how that, so there's a piece of work underway looking at that as well. So I think those were just the two things from me, but certainly I don't know if there's anything else from Lee, Matt or Chloe you want to touch on.
I think many of the those here today have also joined us in our recent ward member engagement session, and I think that was really positive to have lots of comments and engagement during that session. And I think I would just use this as another opportunity to raise awareness of the consultation that's live at the moment, and encourage those groups that you engage with within your work and your areas of the authority to also kind of signpost people to that, because this is obviously a really important moment where we can shape what's ultimately going to be adopted and is going to result in what we work on in the coming years.
Lovely, thank you. And I'm guessing nothing from you extra, Matt. And so just a word before we sort of launch into questions or comments from members on how we're going to utilise the discussion today, because we've got two quite meaty items where we're in sort of public consultation kind of mode. Board members are obviously not only able but actively encouraged to contribute to that consultation as individual ward members. But the idea today is, as the committee looking at climate change and nature recovery, to have a discussion on where there is consensus amongst committee members. Those that feedback will be minuted, and that minuted feedback then will also contribute towards the consultation responses. If there are things that come up and it is only sort of either there's major debate or there's only one or two councillors feel that it's important, I'll respectfully ask you to submit that in your own consultation responses rather than it being minuted as the committee's view. So what we're looking for is the committee's view is where there's consensus amongst the members that are present today. Before we launch into sort of questions or comment that we might want to send forward as feedback, are there any technical questions that anybody wanted to ask, things that they just don't understand? I have one or two, if that's okay. Just me, I think. I wanted to ask, so I have, we've discussed in committee quite a lot the regional transport plan. So sorry that some of my questions are more about the delivery plan. I actually wanted to ask what the Mumbles public transport interchange is, where it is. It references a station. I'm not sure of a station in Mumbles. There may be other examples as well of areas that I don't know so well where there's a reference to a station and we don't know what that is.
I'll jump in there, Councillor. Currently, it's an idea. It isn't anywhere. It's we're looking across the Mumbles area to identify an area where we could assist public transport primarily by allowing it to turn a bus around, because that's the biggest issue is getting in and out of Mumbles, is the fact that a bus can't turn around in Mumbles, which is why you get the buses taking the long loops through Newton and through Limeslade, isn't it? So I mean, we've looked at locations on, I don't know, the Derry car park down at Southend, all kinds of spaces where we think we could get a bus turned around that would allow us to run essentially higher frequency services in and out of Mumbles. But we're at quite an early stage of development in that at the moment.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. And then the other question I had, in reference to the regional line about the review of 20 mile an hour, I was absolutely horrified to see that is described as a blanket 20 mile an hour speed limit. That is not what it is. And that word is being used politically, if I may say, to vilify a scheme that is actually contributing, massively to improvements in safety, and actually lower car insurance premiums. So I just wanted to kind of ask, how that was allowed to slip through, really, because it's not an accurate description of what it is.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. That has obviously slipped through the net in terms of on there, which it shouldn't have. So we'll certainly issue that correction in terms of on there. It's a default, not a blanket, and I think that's a very distinct difference. So we'll certainly make that revision. I can only apologise for that one. I think there's been a significant kind of amount of work in a short period of time. So somehow that got missed in there. But thanks for flagging it up, and apologies on that one.
Okay, thank you. So the rest of my questions are more about kind of the debate on some of the points. So I'll open up to other members first. I don't want to use my position as chair. Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of just quick points, really, I wanted to say in terms of the strategic approach to the plan. First one is, I think as anybody would probably see, the importance of improving bus routes and bus services throughout the area and the connectivity between those. So I think that's the spirit of the plan as well. So that's warmly welcomed. And when we look at about a specific, I'm very interested to see about the inclusion of the Swansea Parkway and the railway stations, which may be, I know they're third-party issues, as you mentioned earlier, Lee, but I think the transformation importance of something like a Parkway station of Lindra and other sort of stations in suburbs of Swansea, I think it's very key that perhaps as a council we look to push that issue. My understanding, and I could be wrong, and you could hopefully correct me if I am, is that we are going to have a Parkway station because it was a part of the contract of Grand Union Trains being awarded train services through to Carmarthen. So hopefully that will happen. Thank you.
Over to you, Matt.
Yeah, it's only very quickly on the sort of third-party delivery schemes. I mean, the original guidance was quite clear that we shouldn't really be including schemes that aren't within our gift to deliver, such as rail schemes, and even things like bus services, which will hopefully be subject to a new franchise model in a couple of years' time. However, there was, after some discussion through the region, I think members and residents, but it will be surprised if we produced a regional transport plan that didn't include these kind of things. So that's why we sort of took the view that we should include them as sort of third-party delivery items. So they're in the scheme, but they're not items that can be directly delivered by a local authority. We can support, certainly, and provide assistance with things like integration of modes and that kind of thing. But yeah, so they're listed in there as things that are in track by somebody else and we know about, and people would expect to see them.
Yes, and I think as well it's quite important that actually they form the spine of the transport network, those key spines of the transport network. If you don't look at the rail and the trunk roads in particular, they can't be looked at in isolation, and nor can some of the more local transport initiatives that we've actually got in our list. So it is actually a holistic picture, and I think actually, unlike some other regions across the country, we've actually been quite proactive in pushing the fact that these more national priorities do need to be listed. I think just in terms of Alindra Station, Grand Union Trains has now been sold to First Group, who obviously own Great Western Trains at the moment, before it all goes back into the Great British Railways pot in the fullness of time. So there is a little bit of news there. First Group took over, I think there was an announcement in November, and a couple of days after, they've actually ordered the rolling stock for the Carmarthen to London trains. So that is highly likely to occur now. There's rolling stock on order. Understand the target date is December timetable change in 2027. So we've got to wait sort of 22, 23 months at the moment for that to appear. But it does look as though it's going to go ahead, initially running via Gowerton and Llanelli rather than taking the district line. And equally, the commitment to Velindre Station was to serve it as and if it was opened. So obviously we're highly reliant on the Metro to deliver Velindre Station, and indeed the other improvements along the Swansea district line that have been discussed before, I'm sure. So in some ways there's a commitment to serve the station if it's open, and obviously that is more tied up to that Welsh Government initiative to look at the phase 1 of the Metro, which I know, Matt, you've been commissioning detailed work on that, and it looks as though there may be an announcement in relatively near future. I think they're getting to the point now where Welsh Government know enough about the scheme to start actually thinking about potentially a decision. Is that a fair comment, Matt, that they're trying to push that forward?
I think so, yeah. I think within the sort of the rail element of the schemes, I think they seem to have enough meat on the bones of the projects now in order to start pushing them forward. So they can identify the funding to do it.
Thanks. Stuart, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, just the sort of Velindre is not a given. It certainly wasn't a conditional on the bid, and as Lee said, it was Grand Union would be keen to serve it if it was put into place. But that doesn't mean that there's an automatic commitment that it will happen. There's a number of stations, as Lee indicated, as part of the the sort of rail metro, South West Wales metro, and improvements on the rail all the way along to look at that, with a number of stations sort of being developed. But the Grand Union was a kind of a private enterprise that looked for sort of access in terms of rail access onto the network, and as I say, it didn't sort of, its existence didn't rely on Velindre being developed. So it sort of not a given, and there's a number of station priorities being considered and developed, and that's certainly one of them, to look at the how it could be a sort of metro line, a service metro line around there. So that's its own piece of work. But I think, yeah, as far as the schemes, the initial view of Welsh Government was that the regional transport plan should just focus on schemes which are almost within the gift of the delivery from the region, so to exclude rail and trunk schemes. But there's a strong feeling from the region that would have ended up with an incomplete picture of what the needs and things are for the region. So we feel very strongly that although it won't be part of the bidding process, it absolutely must be sort of demonstrated as part of the policy priorities and the sort of interventions that would help transform transport within the region. So thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Does that answer your question, Councillor Rice? Yeah, lovely. Are there other questions? I'm not seeing other hands at the moment. Councillor Evans?
Yeah, this is just to say I'm so really happy with the core priorities. One thing I would say is on the third one, if we are encouraging people to make the change to more sustainable transport, we have to make sure that that is available 12 months of the year, which sort of the main time for that really at the moment where it's not available 12 months of the year is during inclement weather, because some of the cycle paths during, especially the national cycle networks, are pretty much unusable, particularly during the winter months with ice.
Thanks, Councillor Evans. And if I could actually perhaps use the opportunity to just test consensus amongst members on the priorities, just as like a top line, because I was also going to suggest that I would be happy with the priorities as they are. Councillor Evans, are you coming back in there? No. You've got a rogue hand.
I'm trying to work out if my hand's up or down because it's doing that thing when it drops out all the time.
That's okay. If I say, would there be any major objections to us minuting that we are broadly happy with the priorities as outlined in the draft plan? No, I'm seeing none. So there we are. Thank you for the point about inclement weather on active travel routes. Did anybody want to come back on that? I know there is. I've read two plans in too short a space of time, but I know there's some reference to sort of climate adaptation and things in the LDP, which perhaps would speak to this in terms of making sure that we've got routes that actually are usable even in poor weather. Stuart?
Yeah, it's a very difficult on this in the sense, at the moment we've had capital funding and relating to active travel, but we've been trying to push for revenue funding. So from I guess a maintenance perspective and enable things like consideration for whether it's some routes could be pre-treated from an ice perspective. So it is something that we're trying to encourage for, but there's a difficulty, I guess, in the wider network really, that we only prioritise certain core strategic routes, and they tend to be the higher usage routes. That's how the winter maintenance is established at the moment. So, but it's certainly something we're aware does cause it's a significant barrier and a challenge to active travel during those periods. So, I think it'll be ongoing dialogue with Welsh Government about how the prioritisation and the funding happens.
Okay, thanks. Am I right in thinking then that the delivery plan is only capital?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, it's the bids will go forward. There is some discussion about how we tackle the issues associated with the revenue consequences of that capital investment. So obviously when we implement, for example, maybe an off-route active travel scheme, it then can lead to some additional maintenance sort of requirements which are not part of the current adopted highway network. So again, they're part of the dialogue with Welsh Government about how those things are sort of dealt with and how ongoing maintenance and different things are prioritised.
Thanks. I think it would be reasonable for committee to note that challenge because it does feel like the capital revenue tug of war, is particularly pertinent here, and be supportive of the ongoing conversations about how the revenue challenge is met. Are there other questions or points from committee members? As always, I've got my list here to fill silences with. I wanted to start off with one on which I'm really supportive. So I'm really supportive of the regional school transport initiative, which requires bus franchising to happen, every step in its place kind of a thing. But I feel like I've been banging on for ages about how important it is that we link up public transport with school transport and increase the access to school transport, I suppose, for families who sit in that 1.9 mile or 2.9 miles radius. My question around it would be, will it take longer for our residents to see the impact of that because we're proposing a regional approach? Will it be a case of actually there's so many things to consider and get right when you're looking at a regional approach that actually for the people of Swansea it's going to be quite a long process? Is there any benefit to looking at that on a Swansea basis first?
I think, as always, Chair, it's difficult to say because, I think the reason they've been put in, shall we say, into the regional basket as opposed to the local basket is that all four authorities are pursuing school travel interventions of some form or another. And actually, although we don't particularly want to run a sort of internal prioritisation exercise and say this scheme is more important than that scheme, it is something that is operating on a pan authority basis. So we know, for instance, Pembrokeshire, they bought one of the coach operators in Pembrokeshire. Main role of that is to provide school transport. So they've got a slightly different view on this to the other three authorities. Obviously, Swansea being more urban, and Matt and Chloe can speak around this a little more, I guess, have obviously pursued school streets. There is some statutory free transport in Swansea, and that's likely to continue. But once again, options about how you manage school transport in Swansea are very different from what they would be in Pembrokeshire, Carmarthenshire, and even Neath Port Talbot. They've got some real specific local challenges. So I think what we're saying is there is a block of money. It will probably be for the authorities to actually identify the best way to go in pursuing an initiative there. But I think it is a matter of saying there are potentially some economies of scale there. So if you're running a school streets initiative in Swansea, a very similar initiative could be rolled out in Neath Port Talbot, Carmarthenshire, Pembrokeshire. So I think it is about identifying those synergies, really. So I see it as positive, and obviously we can pick out what suits Swansea, as it were. Where obviously there are some pan-regional challenges. So we've sort of identified driver numbers as one. That's significant. That's across the region, and I don't think you could probably tackle that on a local authority basis. You would need a wider sort of initiative. So there are some wider initiatives within that sort of space that I think we'd want to tackle. Is that a fair summary, Matt and Chloe? I know you're probably closer to the detail than I, but it really is not quite all things to everybody, but it is actually allowing the authorities to focus on their own particular circumstances.
Before Matt or Chloe just come in there, can I just clarify what I heard then? So what I have understood from what you said is that although it's in the regional basket, that is to do with how the funding is bid for, not how that funding is necessarily spent. So the funding would be allocated on a regional basis, but the local authorities would still have fairly large degree of control over how that was spent, and it may well be then that Swansea actually sort of leaps with their model before Neath Talbot or Pembrokeshire sound like they've got something going already. They just crack on with that. Have I understood that correctly?
I think that's our understanding of how it would work. Yes, indeed. Obviously, we obviously got to work through the CJC, because our understanding at the moment, and Stuart will know far more about this than I, is that the money will arrive at the CJC level and then obviously be distributed to the individual, not so much the individual authorities, but the individual initiatives. So I think there will need to be that very brief scoping exercise, but clearly we know what yourselves and the three fellow authorities are doing, and actually it's identifying within that, I think, what cuts the mustard in each area. The geographies are very different, the issues are maybe overlapping, but there are different solutions, I think, for different locations. So there will be an element of geographic element to that as well. And I think that's where we come from there, that actually the first thing to do is actually say this is an important priority. So we know school transport picks up. We know the road's empty when the schools and colleges are not in session. So we know there's a congestion issue on the back of this. Equally, the other thing it's fair to say is as well, just in terms of school travel as a general point, the analysis techniques that are available to us don't generally pick up link trips very well. So in other words, if you go from home to work, let's say, but you go via the school, that doesn't get picked up very well in the analysis that's available at the, and that's across the piece. It's not just a Swansea or a Wales issue. That's more generally, that's a transport planning issue more generally. Those are the linked sort of, those diverted sort of trips are not picked up particularly well. So I think we know it's a problem because the road's empty on school holidays. Now, there's lots of reasons for that, as you'll appreciate. People taking vacation, obviously people not making that additional journey to and from the school gate, etc. There's lots of reasons behind it, but actually the initiatives to deal with some of the challenges of school transport are probably very similar, to be honest. There's a relatively number, and obviously meeting the statutory responsibilities that the authorities have got is first on that particular target, which is, as Stuart says, a revenue implication. We're not going to solve the revenue issues with school travel through the RTP, but we can actually use the RTP funding to, dare I say, to oil the wheels, if that's not a bad phrase for a climate change committee. But we can actually allow the school transport system to operate effectively. I think also as well, Chair, just to say about bus franchising, originally bus franchising, as it was proposed by TfW, Welsh Government, was very firmly separated from school travel. There is now an initiative coming in Mid Wales that they're looking at running some shadow franchising activity, mainly because there's no real commercially operated bus routes in Mid Wales. They are now looking at tying the two together, which was not the case historically. So actually, I think expect more movement on that as we see the legislation roll into the Senate and so on. I can see that becoming quite a point of discussion as the legislation progresses.
Thank you. I should just clarify that I wasn't necessarily advocating for franchising of existing school transport routes. I want to see franchising unlock opportunities for public routes to be used by school transport for school transport needs. Chloe or Matt, did you want to add anything to that? I leapt in before you.
I think the only thing I would add in is, and to answer your question, I wouldn't see that title necessarily reflecting that it has to be a regional initiative for us to take that forward. I think if there's something that's still specifically within Swansea, that won't deter us from taking that forward in the timescales that we usually would. I think it just allows us that opportunity to kind of almost remove that boundary that currently sits at the edge of Swansea and look at opportunities that are beyond there, and how, potentially there are improvements that could be made to the benefit of those who are travelling potentially cross boundary, or, with the limited budgets that authorities have, whether there's exercises that we can do jointly across the region as well in that regard. So again, to answer your question, I don't think it's about slowing down that process. I think regionally, it would hope that we're just opening up that space to be able to look a lot more flexibly at the travel options that people have.
Thanks, Chloe. I think there's an important point there around retaining a certain degree of local control. I've just seen your hand, Councillor O'Connor, but if I just finish this point, because I'm constantly having to consensus check in this approach, which is hard when you're across two screens. But would committee be comfortable in kind of noting or, expressing, I suppose, support for that model that does mean that we can retain that level of a local initiative to be able to deliver these schemes that are badged regional? Because I think the way they're presented, for me, it sort of gave it an all or nothing feel, when actually what we're hearing today is that if there's stuff that is good for Swansea, and we can deliver it for Swansea even within that regional basket. Are members happy? I'm seeing some oh yes, Hannah's got reactions going and everything. Brilliant. Okay, Councillor O'Connor.
Yeah, mine was just actually, is there any scope to kind of link up the buses with then the trains? And so when you buy a ticket to make it more affordable, that if you, particularly for people working in Cardiff, say, they can get a bus from where they live and then to the train station to then take them into Cardiff, because otherwise people are really put off by taking the bus, because then they still need the car, for various parts of the journey. I think it needs to be linked up and a Wales-wide kind of like trains and buses together, and really key on reliability and being affordable at the same time to encourage people to use it. Thank you.
Thanks. I am going to go ahead and assume, based on previous discussions this committee has had, is that there would be broad consensus on support for through ticketing. Whether or not that is within the gift of the RTP. Stuart, I will hand over to you to tell us.
Yeah, it's not within the gift of the RTP, but it's certainly something which is fundamental to the franchising, and obviously the franchising is strongly referenced through and strongly linked to what's going on through the RTP. But yeah, Councillor O'Connor, it really is an important thing. I think the challenge is, particularly in some areas of Swansea, if you get on in the sort of Gower area, you're not even with the same operator from a bus perspective. So not only do you have to get one ticket for one operator, then you've got to get a ticket for another operator, and then a separate ticket for the rail. So it's absolutely a cornerstone of what the franchising is about with TfW's ambition that it's a one ticket type of system. Or even the tap on tap off to sort of link up, but so that also there's better sort of connectivity between the rail timetables and the bus timetables. So because at the moment that's it. Yeah, it's very much the timetables are kind of done in isolation to a certain degree. The bus operators have got a different I guess a different sort of set of objectives and don't necessarily align with the rail objectives. So I think getting the connection between the timetabling plus that one ticketing sort of approach that will carries through is a real key aspect. So,
yeah, I think it's key. I think it's just because you're spending so much money and time on it, and then of course you've still got to wait the funding. You don't want to have all these conversations years down the line, and then it's still not all connect up. But yeah, no, I agree. Thank you.
Lee, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just briefly, Chair, if I may. I mean, clearly within the programme of interventions, there are a number of bus and rail interchanges that are being promoted both within Swansea and across the region. So the other thing I'd just notice is that TfW are already conducting an experiment over in Carmarthenshire, I think it is, where they've established virtual rail stations. So some of and I'm trying to think where the locations were, but various locations off the Trawse Cymru bus that runs north of Carmarthen, you can actually buy a rail ticket and use that on the bus as well. So you've effectively got a virtual rail station. There's really a bus stop in a town centre, but actually they are already trialling that linkage already. Obviously it's early days yet, so we'll see how that trial goes. But as Stuart says, the tickets are the glue that sticks the network together at the end of the day. And I think that's why we were very reluctant not to list a lot of those national schemes on the rail in particular within the RTP, simply to ensure that sort of linkage between various types of journeys is actually made. So there are a number of interchange proposals, interchange that support that, as well as the issue with the ticketing. Physically joining the two networks together is particularly important as well. Thanks.
I would just say, when I worked in Cardiff, it's probably 8 or 9 years ago now. At that time, there was a ticket provided by First that you could buy on the bus, and it took you onto the train. Now, it was a bit of an odd one because you had to take the train to Cardiff after 9:30, which isn't very useful if you're trying to get into work. But sometimes this through ticketing conversation forgets that those solutions have already existed locally and now don't. So yeah, Councillor Evans, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I was going to say that it used to be able to get the bus from Clydach, and then you'd end up being able to get the Greyhound down from the Quadrant up to Cardiff Uni. One of the main problems with that, though, is the bus from Clydach used to get there 2 minutes after the Greyhound had left.
Oh, that's even better,
So,
isn't it?
yeah, so timetabling is also important, as well as the through ticketing.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay. I've got one question left on my list, so I'll just pause before I ask it to check whether anybody's... Yep, Councillor Lawson.
Hi, yeah, thanks. I just really wanted to ask about what data has been gathered so far and what is yet to be gathered as part of the plan, in terms of which areas currently have the least amount of opportunity for whether it's cycling or getting public transport, those areas that are maybe don't have a railway station, don't have a cycle track, areas where there's a paucity of sustainable choices, and how that will be fed into the plan.
Thank you. Who's going to take that one?
I'll just start off and hand over to I guess Lee in terms of Matt for the detail. But yeah, there's a significant amount of sort of transport modelling and things gone in, which has looked at the kind of time between certain stations, destinations, the availability of transport. There's quite a rich seam of data that's been used, and as well the availability of some of the ticket data that's been purchased on been managed on an all-wheels basis from TfW, the availability of some of the, I guess, the journey time information things. So certainly that's been a strong base of evidence that's been gathered to hopefully highlight where some of the gaps are. And that not just helps inform the regional transport plan considerations, but it also helps shape some of the future considerations for a network on franchising. It also, the availability of data, things like journey time delays on public transport networks, so that we can then tackle the corridors to improve reliability and reduce journey time. And it also shows the areas where it's sort of transport deprivation, in effect, where it's much more challenging to get that access. But the knowledgeable people of Chloe, Matt and Lee may have further comment from my overview. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Stuart. And yes, Chair, there is a lot of data that is out there. In some ways, once again, it's a matter of sorting the wheat from the chaff. There's almost, dare I say, too much data. You let the analytical side of this run. But what there is, as Stuart says, there's an enormous amount of data in terms of the socio-economics of the region. So matters like car ownership, in the various indices of deprivation are in that mix as well. Also, as Stuart says, we've started there is data available from TfW about bus and rail use, but also even the most basic things like when is the first and the last bus of the day to some key destinations. So you can actually understand that, there's an issue, for instance. I mean, let's just surmise getting to Morriston Hospital from the east and northeast of Swansea is very difficult by public transport. You'd understand that, but you've got to ride into the town, into the city and back out again. So lots of access, so lots of that type of analysis, but also we've done quite a detailed exercise looking at accessibility, where we've actually understood the journey times by walking, cycling, public transport, so we've included rail in the mix as well, but also by car. And that obviously gives us the understanding as to where we need to tackle some specific problems. As I say, the east of Swansea to Morriston Hospital is an obvious one. You've got to come into Swansea on if you want to make that by pub journey by public transport. You come into Swansea and back out again, whereas you'd hop in the car and do the journey on a reasonable day in what 15, 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes at peak time. So there's examples like that that show up quite clearly in that analysis. That you can see the sort of journey time bands in sort of 5 or 10 minute intervals there, and it gives you a reasonable idea of the sort of barriers that are there, the challenges. There's also some quite detailed mapping of bus service frequencies, obviously aligned to where the bus stops are as well, so we start to bring that data in. As you appreciate, not all bus stops are probably ideally located for the communities they're trying to serve. So there's some challenges then about the sort of footway links that are around those bus stops, that once again, part of the RTP maybe to invest in some of those links to improve matters. And I say, I think the key to this is as well, there's all that social data in there. So the index of the deprivation, car ownership levels. I'm trying to think, Matt and Chloe, what else is in there, but the whole type of census data that's collected across the piece is in the background there to give us that sort of real picture as to what is going on. The other thing we've got, for instance, as well, we got quite enamored early on by looking at HGV movements, and obviously more in the rural areas, but clearly HGV movements are quite significant. And what we found there when we looked into the data was vast majority of the lorries in the region are obviously on the M4 corridor, as you probably would expect. A lot of those are just passing through the region to go to the ports, so they bring very little benefit to the region, but we get all the disbenefits. So that's one thing we've been looking at. What do we do about how do we manage HGVs more effectively across the region? Some of that will be routing, some of it will be environmental, but actually there's a big issue, we believe, from the data of HGVs sort of parking in back streets, where the drivers need to take their overnight rest break and so on. So actually there could be something about how the roadside facilities work for those for the lorry drivers, just because of the amenity issues that these random lorries parking up in residential areas cause. So lots of data we're seeing there, and obviously what you see in the RTP is very much a summary of the outcomes of that analysis, but it is all in there. And if there's anything specific you want to know about, just let Stuart and Matt know, and we can dig into that a little more. But there is lots of data in there, Stuart says.
I appreciate some of the data is probably in some quite unwieldy formats, but
Indeed,
I think some people, as part of the consultation, would find it quite interesting to maybe get a little bit more a little bit more of a localized look, particularly when it comes to their own immediate area.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the challenge is the accessibility analysis alone. We were very tempted to put that in the consultation, but it was something like 150 pages of maps. We just thought that was maybe a little bit of overkill. I'm sure people will ask us through the responses to look at specific locations, but yeah, we just thought we came to the view that was likely to be a bit of overkill, really. Asking people to wade through 150 plus. By the time you added the social data in, there's probably 250 plus maps in there. So, a difficult choice not to put that in the consultation, but this is just the sheer volume of it, I think, really.
From what you're saying, though, Lee, it's not that it's not public, as in if somebody asked for it, it could be made available to them.
I think if people ask for it, we'd probably make it available. I mean, obviously that's subject to Matt and Chloe and Stuart view around how that works, but the data, the information is there. Okay. It's not been built. The RTP is not built on sand. There is a sound evidence base behind it that is wide and unwieldy, perhaps, but obviously we've had to draw some conclusions from that.
Okay, thank you. Matt, were you coming in to say that?
Yeah, that's good.
Pretty much, yes. I mean, the data is there. A lot of it is quite, it's very technical. I mean, there's probably a case for making some of it available at the in-person sessions. So if anyone is interested, we can talk them through it.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that.
I think that could be a useful steer from committee as well. If people are happy that, in terms of driving up engagement, making that data available would be good. Brilliant. Thank you. Councillor O'Connor, I can see your hand, but not your face anymore, I'm afraid. There you are, you're back.
Hiya, thank you. Just basically on the data, and how heavy will the data influence the funding allocation between all the different wards, or have you not thought that far ahead yet about, the funding being equally divvied up, or is that not the case? Just wondering.
I think the challenge is the Welsh Government want us to provide, in theory, a list with a #1 priority project down to whatever number we get to. We know that that's more subtle, I think, across the region. And obviously Stuart's heavily involved in this debate at the moment, along with Chloe and Matt. The real issue is understanding that subtlety. I think just because of the sheer nature of a regional transport plan, it's probably not going to get down to ward level. In terms of the funding, it's certainly going to come down, I think, to local authority level eventually, particularly as we discussed earlier with those regional schemes. And there are obviously a number of schemes, individual schemes within each authority that have been identified as ones that need to be progressed. So I think it'll certainly come down to authority level, but obviously that then I think is a matter of conversations with Matt, Chloe, Stuart about how that then is actually took forward within the Swansea environment. Certainly I'm sure we've identified some schemes within Swansea in very specific places, and they're probably quite big ticket items. We've talked about the Mumbles bus interchange, the potential new station, quite chunky pieces of investment there where we can actually say, subject to finding a detailed location, that we need to invest in this area or that ward, where actually I think the discussion and the detail of that is very much to be worked up, isn't it, Matt and Chloe, about where would you spend, let's say, active travel money. You've got a map of that already, for instance, so there's already some plans set out in principle for where you'd spend, let's say, active travel funding.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, we're kind of the manner in which grant money is going to be allocated is changing this year, and we still don't have real clarity on exactly what that's going to look like for 2026, 27 once we get into the plan period. So whereas you've got the things that we know at the minute, which are sort of ongoing schemes, we've also then got the sort of what are at the minute smaller grant pots, like all the safe routes and community stuff and the road safety grants, which are much smaller, and we're yet to truly get our heads around how Welsh Government see that operating in the future.
Okay, thank you. I'm mindful that we've got another really chunky agenda item, so I'm going to ask my last question and then I'm going to wrap this one up, if that's okay. So it is about hydrogen refuse collection vehicles. I was intrigued to see that Neath Talbot had put a hydrogen refuse collection vehicle as one of their lines in the delivery plan, but only Neath Talbot. And I just wondered, we've talked about hydrogen for our fleet and been given very good reasons as to why we're not, the technology is not quite ready for hydrogen refuse collection vehicles. So I'm just wondering, why Neath Talbot saying they are going to try it, and would there be an opportunity for us to learn lessons from them, really, to help us on our journey towards decarbonising that element of our fleet? I can see Councillor Lewis has got a hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just very briefly, it's not something that we wouldn't consider, but we do have to take into account that the hydrogen refuse vehicles are 3 times the cost of a normal refuse vehicle. So cost is a barrier at the moment, and also the access to hydrogen fueling as well. But we are looking at it. And if there was grant available, of course, we would give this serious consideration, because hydrogen, I truly believe, is the finishing post for these types of vehicles, because electric isn't ideal for our hilly city. But we're not quite there at the moment. It's just out of reach in terms of affordability, unfortunately.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Matt, did you want to add to that?
I completely agree with Councillor Lewis. This kind of thing that sort of they say Neath Talbot are after is likely to be a study into how you would operate a hydrogen vehicle rather than buying a hydrogen vehicle. I mean, we are going to be limited by the total pot of money which is available across the plan period, which is probably going to be around, in broad terms, what we've had over the last 5 years. I think that's the rumblings coming out of Welsh Government. So I think whilst some of these things will be listed in the delivery plan, it would be studies into how you would go about doing it rather than actually doing it, if that makes sense.
That is a really helpful clarification, Matt. And I guess I would give some gentle feedback that some of the descriptions to a cold reader are not as easy to understand as perhaps they are to people who've been looking at this for, I understand, a long period of time. Right, so I'll just wrap up then, just to make sure that I've captured committee views accurately. In terms of things that I felt that there was consensus on for us to say in the minutes, I think we said we are supportive of the priorities in the plan, recognise a really strong interdependency with key third-party schemes, and we've talked about today bus franchising, through ticketing, rail and the metro. We give a steer that we think it would be helpful for some of the data around accessibility to be available at the in-person sessions. And we are, supportive and feel it is very important that we retain some local, the local control of the implementation, even where the schemes are kind of badged as a regional scheme. I think everything else that came up are kind of quite specific things that I would encourage members to put in their personal responses, unless anybody wants to correct me. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, great. I think that was a really helpful session, and thank you so much to officers and to Lee for, you've given us a lot of your time over the months for us to consider this in quite a lot of detail, and we've had pre-workshop sessions and things, so thank you very much for that, and we look forward to seeing you at in-person sessions and seeing the plan as it progresses. So thanks so much. Okay, great. Right then, let's all take a breath. On to our next massive item to consider, which is the Local Development Plan 2. Councillor Hopkins, am I handing over to you for a brief word of introduction, or straight over to Tom?
No, thanks, Chair. I would just a brief introduction if I could. First, I would welcome the committee's input into the future of the LDP2, and particularly would look forward to how we shape that going forward. And this is very much what the input I want to get out of the committee, probably not just at this session, but probably at further sessions, is how we shape it going forward. But what I would ask at this point, could we please not make it site-specific? If there are issues within the wards or within the areas that you have got concerns on, that is a separate process I would ask you to follow. And myself and Tom will be available for them individual site meetings and site discussions at the appropriate time. So more than happy at this point to hand over, particularly to Tom Evans, who's done a considerable amount of work, and I know that quite an ambitious target plan as well. So more than happy to hand over to Tom.
Thank you. Over to you, Tom.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Hopkins, and thank you, Chair. I'll say right up the front, in terms of the amount of work that goes into LDP stuff. It's not me that does all the hard work, it's the team under me, and then I step up and do the presentation and get all the glory. So a shout out to all the team that do have been working hard and will continue to be so over the next couple of years, because as Councillor Hopkins has said there, it is an ambitious time frame for delivery, and a heck of an undertaking, some of these key stages to get through based on the sort of statutory process that has to be followed. So yeah, a lot to be done. So what I'll do, if it's all right, is just share a few slides with you, just to make it easy. And I really do appreciate, we said at the beginning of the meeting, in terms of the amount of information, it's I always find myself apologising when I report stuff about LDP, because it it is a huge amount of information to digest, not just on the sort of the key plans that come forward or the stages of the plan itself, but it's everything that sits in the background that kind of informs it, all of this sort of evidence and so on, and the sort of concurrent processes that go with it. You'll see, or you will have seen in the report there, some references to the descriptions of what's known as the integrated sustainability appraisal. You might have seen that, and you would know that process is done on all sorts of council plans and strategy, particularly where they're of this kind of scale, and that in itself is quite an undertaking, generates all the information. So yeah, apologies for that, but what I'll try to do, just going through a few slides now, is sort of summarize where we are with things and some of that information for you. So if I just share my screen and the PowerPoint, let's have a look. If I go in here, I'm just going to check with you first that you're seeing that okay. Look for thumbs up. Yeah, okay.
It's come up for me, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, just taking you through the report. Then a version of this was presented to full council meeting in January, and at that meeting, the resolutions were given then to take the document forward, or a number of documents forward, but the main one being this first plan that is known as the pre-deposit one, and uses the terminology in the guidance, the preferred strategy, to take that forward for a consultation. But also alongside that, some other statutory documents will be available for comment as well, and that includes the sustainability appraisal that I mentioned, and also the list of the candidate sites, the sites for potential development that have been put forward by site promoters and interested parties then. So that document is available as well. Just to highlight, what was also confirmed at that council meeting was the revised version of the delivery agreement, and this is the delivery agreement being the sort of contract then that put it in those terms between the council and the Welsh government as to how we will produce this plan, and why we'll do it in a proper way, and over what sort of time frame, using what resources and so on. So revised version of that has been done just to bring it up to speed in terms of its timeline, up to date with this timeline, to reflect what other plans have been experiencing, the replacement plans, and also just to put a few extra months on this that was done on this pre-deposit period, because we have already done quite a lot of stakeholder engagement to get to this stage. It's been non-statutory. This is the first required consultation. This one that's coming up, but we've already been doing a lot of engagement work, and I think that was the right decision to do that, including multiple meetings of the member engagement group, cross-party groups being set up, but all sorts of work with different sectors and key stakeholders then, and in fact a public consultation of sorts as well. So that has been done, but we're gearing up now to a consultation which will be for about 8 weeks, to start in a few days' time, and I'll come back to some of the terms of the consultation. But what I just want to say, with a few bullets here, is what is set out in the covering report is obviously what that pre-deposit plan is all about. And the consultation, the sort of engagement that's been done so far has been particularly on the key issues and the vision and the strategic objectives that sort of underpin the whole plan. Really, we formulate policies and proposals based on, well, what is the sort of guiding principle stuff, what are the major issues for Swansea, and what do we need to be responding to in terms of land use planning, and our sort of strategy going forward for development, and for environmental protection and environment protection and so on. So we've done that, a lot of that work, but it is now presented in a form that can be consulted on, and there is a whole set of those sort of underpinning objectives. It also is concerned with establishing what the scale of growth is proposed to be, both in terms of numbers of jobs to be created through some of our proposals, and the scale of housing growth. That's an example of where the sort of supporting documents, underpinning evidence then has been very significant. The sort of work that goes into and getting those kind of projections sorted out, and that sort of forecasting work done, to understand how populations are going to grow and so on, how what's going to happen. As far as we can establish in terms of crystal ball gazing towards the economy and so on. So yeah, that's been done, and we also, this pre-deposit plan also sets out in the sort of broadest of terms, how we're going to, in spatial terms, how we're going to marry up to those growth targets in terms of things like allocations and strategic sites and so on. But crucially, it doesn't get down to the level of individual sites at this stage. It doesn't, it says the kind of sites that we'll be looking for example, sites to deliver high levels of affordable housing, but it doesn't yet get down to identifying where those will be. That comes in the next stage, and I'll highlight that in a moment in terms of those next stages. And then just to finish off, really, the documents also sets out what we call a sort of placemaking framework for 2038, because that is the plan period. It's 2023 to 38, or 15-year period. The work started on it in 2023. That's why that's the base date. And a set of strategic policies then in Chapter 8 are provided, covering all sorts of themes. So I mentioned about some of those supporting documents already, and say those will be made available for the consultation process as well. And then the consultation itself, as I say, we're definitely going to kick off in February. It's all really just about the admin side of things now, waiting for translations and things to be done before we can press the button on that. But I would like that to be starting on Monday. An email has already gone out. You should have received that email informing everyone, and that's one you will have received it if you're signed up to be part of the process on the database. So if you want to get those kind of updates, they sort of happen automatically. You can register for that. But in any event, there's going to be an email out to all key stakeholders, including all members, about the start of the consultation when it does kick off. And I say I would like that to happen, if not by sort of Friday this week, then early first few days of next week. And it's going to be for 7 to 8 weeks, decent time period. And then during that time, there'll be meetings of the member engagement group I mentioned, and all sorts of other ways, other stuff the team will do to get people made aware and involved, drop-in sessions, stuff online. We use in our virtual room, our sort of platform. There's a still from the image from the software down there, and all sorts of other sort of talking between departments and so on. There's just a couple more slides, and that's just to say, I highlight in the report that there are specific issues, key issues, strategic objectives, and policies that are what can be described as particularly attuned to the climate change and nature recovery theme then, but with it being an all-encompassing aim of the council, or agenda rather of the council to address, and for the council to address in its major plans, including the LDP, then you will see it interwoven through all sorts of these objectives and components and policies. But I just highlighted a few that were very directly related there. And then just to say next steps, really, it's as well as doing the consultation, it's the ongoing process of building more detailed evidence to inform things like the assessments of the sites that we need to get through, and it's in the formation of the deposit plan itself, which is the detailed one with allocations and policies and proposals in it. And it's that plan and that evidence then, that deposit plan, that evidence, that will be submitted to Welsh Government for the public inquiry then, if that is accepted in that form, and we don't get objections from government, and that we're allowed to go forward to examination, then that will happen then in due course. And which certainly the time frame is to move towards adoption by the end of 2027. So we need that inquiry we need that plan to be submitted, deposit plan to be submitted next year. But it's quite an undertaking to do that. They are as we've already discussed, takes a very sort of resource intensive, and needs to cover all sorts of topics and themes, but we will get there. So I will stop sharing at that point then, and I think, if it's okay, I'll hand back to you, Chair, and I am here to take any questions at all on the process and where we're going forward with it.
Lovely, thank you, Tom. That's really helpful. As you say, although you've got those specific objectives and policies that you've pulled out for us, reading it through, it really, climate change and nature recovery really are a thread throughout the whole plan, aren't they? Which I'll just say from the outset, I think is really welcome and essential, really. So thank you. I will open up to committee members for questions, comments. Councillor Rice, quick off the mark as always.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few comments and questions really for this one, Chair and Tom. There are obviously a few principles which we outlined in the last council meeting that we were talking about, and one of the things that I'm particularly interested in, following on the agenda for the committee, is looking at the candidate sites. What, in terms of the hectareage or the acreage which is being identified, how much of it is greenfield? How much would it be brownfield or greyfield sites? That's something I think would be quite interesting to see where we're heading in the direction there. And has, going forward as the next stage really as a part of the LDP, has any special planning guidance been considered on office or retail conversion? Because I see that as a big trend, and obviously in terms of the environment, climate change, conversion is always better in carbon terms than new builds. So have we got anything specifically looked at there? We've got a number of large greyfield sites across the county which could take a lot of housing, be it even the Civic Centre, Oldway House, Alexandra House. There's lots of them out there at the moment. And in terms of Section 106 monies that come from this going forward, especially when you're looking at green infrastructure and what you put in terms of nature recovery, is there a strategic approach that you want to take? Is there a way in which you're looking to maybe pool that money, look at certain overall targets that we could help guide you on in future committees, or the rest of the council could help on? And do you have any particular sites where you would be looking via the process to make it easier for developers to develop than other sites. For example, where there's already infrastructure in place, or greyfield sites. Because at the moment, what I've seen previously in previous years is developers seem to almost intrinsically go towards greenfield sites before they'll go to anything else. I mean, the prime example is Velindre. There is all the infrastructure in the world there, but there's no developers. That's all I've got to say there.
Thank you. Before you come in, Tom, Councillor Ross's first point actually connects to a question I had noted. So if I just ask it now, because it's linked, on the policy around circular economy, one of the lines there is about prioritising the adaptive reuse of existing buildings rather than demolition, which is certainly something I would be very supportive of. Makes complete sense to me. I just wondered in planning terms what prioritising really means when, you know, if you've got an application on the table, it's rarely X versus Y, it's X versus nothing. So how do you prioritise in a planning world? Thanks.
Okay, great. I will. Yeah, I'll start with that one then. It's. I think, you know, you're asking the right question here in relation to this is how can we plan for some of this stuff in terms of, you know, the prioritizing the reuse of buildings as opposed to allocating new greenfield sites is definitely a plan objective, and it is in the current plan in terms of trying to maximize the use of brownfield sites and previously developed land. What we have to balance that with, though, is when we're looking at all the evidence about how we are going to grow, and there's types of, for example, on the housing side of things, the type of homes that we're going to need, then that will inevitably involve the greenfield sites needing to be allocated. We can't deliver the amount of homes, 10,000 plus homes, only on the brownfield sites that we've got, because we've done the work to identify where the land is available within settlements and the type of land that we've got. We know that can't be delivered only through previously developed land. We did the same thing for the existing LDP, and it led to the allocation of major strategic sites, some of which are on greenfield land. And we're reflecting on all of those in housing terms as to whether they are still suitable to come forward. Some of them are commitments anyway, so they don't get allocated anymore. They just get shown as land with committed planning permissions, and they will contribute towards the numbers, you know, delivering homes over the next 15 years. But some of them are yet to be converted then from current allocations to planning permissions with signed legal agreements. So we're looking at those as to whether they are still suitable. But our strategy that's set out in the pre-deposit plan is to take those forward. You'll see from that policy on what we call strategic placemaking and regeneration areas. Then those are highlighting the same sorts of locations then that are currently allocated then for major sites, because the work we've already done at that high level is showing that they are suitable to come forward. But they are shown as being part of the strategy, but they need to be subject to ongoing assessments, and they will be in line with any alternatives that are put forward. So so the answer really is it's a difficult one because that remains our objective, and we'll do anything we can to promote the brownfield and greyfield sites that we will be able to allocate. But as I say, we know that there isn't a way of giving a sort of prioritized order. Developers will only be able to go to these sites in the city centre or whatever, or at the waterfront, before they are able to deliver greenfield sites. There isn't a mechanism in the plan to be able to do that. It's a case of, are they suitable for these sites suitable for allocations or not, and then they get allocated. So that's the way that we need to do it. In relation to the sort of the related point about things like facilitating conversions, office buildings, and such. That's a really interesting one, because again, that can make a really good contribution towards housing in the within urban areas. But at the same time, we know we have finite amount of office stock, and we need to provide and to have a bank of available office uses for potential conversion and improvement to provide for the sort of investment we want to see and the office space. So again, that taps into the work that we've had done that's looked at by sector, the sorts of demand that's going to be out there. That it's had to reflect on things like the amount of home working that happens now. So how much office space do we need? But this council has a very clear strategy of wanting to see further investment. We are delivering new office space, as we all know, of a high grade. But cities can't just offer grade A office accommodation only. We have to provide for lower grade, more affordable stuff for other businesses as well, to attract that investment and sustain that kind of job growth. So yeah, we need to have a position where we will sometimes allow for those conversions where we think that building is redundant in that use for office use. And we think, this lends itself to conversion and will provide appropriate sort of amenity space and so on. For example, some office blocks we know couldn't be converted in a way that would provide suitable accommodation. And some have been demolished previously and replaced with other blocks because the structural reports have found that the ceiling heights are too low and can't be raised and so on. For just by way of a detailed example, not every building is going to be suitable to be converted. But yeah, we need to have a policy position that allows for it in suitable circumstances, and again, it's an example of where the existing plan does that, and I've no doubt that will continue to be a policy position in the new plan. And I think, just reflecting on that is one thing that I should emphasise in terms of the LDP2. We are lucky in a way that we're not starting from scratch. We've got LDP1 that, although adopted some time ago, was six years or so ago. It's still very relevant and up to date. There's a point I sort of emphasise at council, I think, in that we're building on that plan and looking to refine it and looking to bring it up to date with the latest evidence, but also the very latest in terms of agendas that we've got as a council and how the world has changed. So we need to do that, but it's not a case. Previously we were looking to adopt an LDP over what was then known as a unitary development plan, which is completely different, really. So it certainly took a long time to get it over the line as well. So, but now this is a bit of a different process in that sense. So we are sense checking all the policies that we've got, and some of them remain perfectly in tune with today's agendas and the national policy framework, and that's a good thing. And they're being used effectively as well in decision making, whereas others we know that we need to reflect on. So that was that. Just picking up on yeah, the question was asked very specifically: how much of the candidate sites is a greenfield, and how many are brownfield? If I heard that question correctly, but that just isn't known yet because we haven't assessed the sites to that degree of detail for potential allocations yet. The stage it's at the moment in terms of candidate sites are to say we have had a bunch of them submitted in excess of 100, and sort of we just need to present that list, not as anything of any having particular merit over others. The stage it's at the moment is to sort of just make the public and stakeholders aware of what was submitted. So that there's been a sort of stage one assessment of it to see whether there are some fundamental problems with the sites, whether they're too small anyway to be allocated, whether they are something like they don't have any chance of getting a means of access to them, so stuff like that. But most of them go forward for this detailed assessment. So that sort of work is ongoing then, and then we'll make a decision and recommendations to the council for the deposit as to which ones, and then from there you will be able to present. Well, we think in the deposit plan there should be X percentage should be sort of brownfield, X should be greenfield, reflecting on what all our sort of policies and all our objectives are. So that's the stage when we'll know that. And then just the final one, I think, was about section 106 agreements and what will be the approach that we'll take. Will there be guidance, or just to highlight on that there'll be a new policy on planning obligations, and the process of section 106 remains as it is. It's we can't change the way it's used, and as the mechanism for securing planning obligations, alongside planning conditions can be used for certain things, but where we're talking about those kind of benefits to be written into a legal agreement, it's a section 106. The process of pooling obligations towards can be done, and what we will seek contributions towards is something that we can reflect on, and that will be written into policy and also into a new supplementary guidance on the topic. That we definitely need a new piece of supporting guidance on that to support the new policy, because that's an example of an existing guidance that needs to be updated, and we need to reflect on what we could potentially be seeking contributions for and what is potentially viable, financially viable to do as well. That they are, that process is absolutely interwoven into the concept of 106 agreements. There is absolutely no point in pretending that development can deliver all sorts of wider benefits that may be unrelated. For example, you're not even allowed to write that into a legal agreement. It has to be directly related to the development, and we can't pretend that it could fund all our sort of social infrastructure either. It's been shown for a long period of time that these are contributions towards the delivery of certain things, and for example, things like the building of hospitals and so on are not done entirely through the contributions of and other sort of primary healthcare. Then are not done through the pooling of developer contributions, but there may be occasions where the development process plays a part in that. So hopefully I've addressed the range of questions, I'll say, because there was a few different types of question there, but I'm happy to clarify anything.
Thank you, Tom. Does that answer your questions? That's all right.
Yeah, I think that's really useful. Thank you, Tom. I think just to follow up, I suppose I might take up with you via email is looking at what the previous candidate sites which were identified and how many have been taken up greenfield versus brownfield. And I think it probably leans towards the greenfield.
Okay, I'll leave you to have that discussion offline. That's okay.
Absolutely.
Are there other hands that want to go up at this point? I think committee members, before I go to my list. I'm not seeing. Oh, Councillor Baker.
Hi. We earlier on in Tom's explaining, we know in a few places in the Pend area have been upgraded. Like the Spark Centre was originally a children's centre. Before that, it was housing for flats. They've refurbished from the Spark Centre. They've been gone years now, well over 10 years. The building was deteriorating, and they've refurbished the complete building, including the bat boxes, bird boxes. The area out the back is beautiful and green, and the way it's been presented, it looks like a rose between all phones up here. The Penland Old District Housing was refurbished. It was a choice, pull them down or refurbish. And they refurbished it, and that is pretty as well up there, which bird boxes, bat boxes have been added to these new builds, which I think is pretty good. As for the grey areas, I agree on planning to go ahead and build on these green areas. Not the green areas, the grey areas, the grey areas, you got me. But for refurbishing building and old offices, I think it's brilliant. Rather than pull the property down, dirt, dust, God knows what's in the walls. Some of them are really old. They do need refurbishing. And there is housing. We look at housing, there's so many thousand on the register that need to be housed. We can't build houses quick enough for them. And the only way I can see it is by releasing some of these properties, like offices, not going to be used anymore. How can't they turn them into flats?
Thank you, Councillor Baker. I can see Councillor Lewis's hand went up during that. Do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Baker for her kind comments. Wherever possible within communities, I think we should always think first about social housing, because we know that there's an extreme demand for that. And I completely agree with Councillor Baker's comments. If we have an opportunity to convert an old, tired, building into some supreme, excellent social housing, then let's do that. But I take Tom's point. I think Tom was specifically referring to the city centre in terms of careful consideration. And I think, you know, we need to have quality office space and encourage more footfall into the city centre. So I think it depends on the site, and it depends on the actual building and the location of the building. If we have an opportunity in communities where we don't have a great deal of council housing, we absolutely should take that as a first consideration. But it's a site-by-site basis, essentially. But following on from Councillor Baker's comments about bat boxes, and, you know, Swift housing as well. You know, we're very proud of the building services team are doing an excellent job, and so housing, in terms of trying to make sure that our buildings are climate and that. So really pleased and long may continue.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. We just lost you a little bit at the end there, but we got most of what you were saying. Yes, thank you for that. I think I'm hearing consensus that generally the committee supports reuse and refurbishment of existing buildings, you know, where there is opportunity to do so, which I think is a bit of a no-brainer, and I think is in the text of what's there at the moment. So that's great. I'll just come in with a couple of the points I wanted to raise, if that's okay. The first is on energy. So there's reference to the local area energy plan, which is very much welcomed. This committee's done a lot of work on that plan. I would say, in comparison to some other aspects of decarbonisation that feature more prominently in the plan, there's comparatively little detail on what some of those energy commitments mean in practice. So I very much welcome the suggestion that there'll be new supplementary planning guidance on renewable and low carbon energy. But I just wonder, is there scope within this plan, for example, for us to insist on, renewable energy, and whether it be housing, commercial, whatever type of development? Is that even possible? What was some of the thinking behind that? Or is there simply detail that I've not spotted yet?
A couple of things in response to that. Yeah, you hopefully highlight there in terms of the ongoing work of the energy plan, but also the renewable energy assessment that's been done as a part one for the purposes of the pre-deposit document. But we're going to go on to be working with our consultant team, who were the same ones that did the energy local area energy plan, city science, and they've done this part one, and we are going to either work with them, or if considered better to go with another partner, but certainly an expert in the field to develop the more detailed stage for the deposit plan, and to consider things like targets, which don't form part of the not suitable to go into a pre-deposit stage, but certainly for a detail where you can have, we need to look at whether we're going to have targets over and above anything that is in national requirements then, for example, building standards and so on. That there is the answer to your question is there scope for it to have those specific requirements written into a plan? Yes, there is, but it's going to take a lot of testing and evidence, really, in particular to demonstrate that it's going to be a viable proposition to ask for that. We will no doubt get an awful lot of pushback from industry. The suggestions that we put any requirements over and above what is in, let's say, national standards in respect of low carbon technologies and so on, because the claim will be made that it just makes development or push developers towards other locations where they don't have those kind of targets, and it would make the development unviable. But we don't know the answers to that until we've done the sorts of work that's required to really consider the implications of doing so. But that is a really good example of the sort of detail work we need to do over the course of this year and going into next to evidence what is going to be a detailed policy on the issue.
Thanks. And so those targets would look at renewables on development. Would they also look at like targets for energy generation production, like in the same way that we've got a target for the number of houses we want to build, a target for the number of, whether it be windmills, solar panels,
It's more likely to be a target for attainment for a development to reach in terms of amount of energy that would be generated by those kind of technologies. Yeah. To one end of the spectrum being, can you have zero carbon development proposals on certain sites? Can you have it on as part of certain types of development? That's stuff that I haven't seen yet in any development plan. But they are coming through a deposit stage now, some of these replacement ones. So it could be again, where it's viable, these are the sorts of things that we need to be looking at.
Thank you. no hands have gone up while I was speaking there, so I'll ask my other question and then see whether we've got anything else before we finish. So I just wanted to say, on the positive side, I think it's fantastic to see transport given such prominence throughout the plan, very much in keeping with the work of this committee, and obviously particularly relevant given what we discussed in the first half of the meeting.
Yeah.
I just wondered, it's sort of a technical point, I suppose, really, what the definition of a high frequency bus route is. Because I think there are very few parts of Swansea that are served by what I would define as a high frequency bus route. And are decisions, planning decisions made considering services as they are at the point of making that decision? The reason I'm asking is, with franchising, we should have greater influence over the network and the timetabling, and will that need to be in place before a planning decision would count that as being, well connected? If a new route or a increased frequency was coming down the track but it wasn't in place yet, how would that play?
Yeah, I think there probably isn't a hard and fast rule on what would be, as a planning authority either making the decision or making the recommendation then to the committee on in that situation, we would have to reach a view on the balance of, like in all likelihood, is the sort of test really, is this going to be the sort of service that is going to be delivered here? If it's yet something that yet to be kind of consulted on by us as a council or whatever, something like that, then we'd have to temper our recommendation on that. But if we were convinced that was going to be likely, that is a material factor to take into consideration then. And then in terms of what actually is a high frequency, yeah, that's an example of where we need to consider what's the difference between rural, semi-rural, urban area, what would be reasonably be expected for if you can have 3 buses an hour, 2 buses an hour, whatever it is, in an urban area, then or 4, that's sounding to me like what you'd expect in terms of high frequency, but you're not going to get that in terms of our rural areas. So again, it illustrates a bit that how we do have a very contrasting picture in Swansea in terms of what we're planning for. We're planning for to try and sustain rural and semi-rural areas, allow villages to grow in appropriate manner, or certainly be sustained, and yet we know that it's not going to have the same sort of connectivity to public transport, and also that active travel can be more challenging in some of those areas in terms of connectivity to all the range of sort of services and facilities then that we want these sort of communities to have access to, if we're going to be looking to allow them to grow. So yeah, it'll be a totally different sort of frequency, and yeah, 4 or 5 an hour is not going to be realistic. And yeah, and on reflection, for an urban area, that is the sort of frequency you'd want to see, rather than only 2 or 3.
Yeah, I think in an urban area, you would want the kind of turn up and go level of frequency, which generally, I think, received wisdom I've heard is that if you're waiting more than 15 minutes, it's not turn up and go. So it's you're looking at 4 buses an hour, which as you say, in rural areas is just totally not anything like what we have at the moment. Okay, we've got a few minutes left if there are other questions or comments from committee members. I have to say that this one has been more challenging for me to identify the things on which there is consensus in the room, perhaps unsurprising. Apart from that, reusing buildings and prioritising brownfield sites, which I think is a point worth underscoring from climate change point of view. So certainly we'll minute that to be fed back. Otherwise, if I can just very much encourage members to engage with the consultation process when it kicks off, both as as yourselves, but also encouraging our communities, because this is I've seen firsthand how these documents are then used in practice, and they're really very powerful tools. So please do encourage your communities to get involved in the consultation. Thank you ever so much, Tom, Councillor Hopkins, on that item. No I think I just have the work plan at the end of the agenda, do I? Looking for Jeremy now to guide me.
Chair. Yeah.
Yes, lovely. So the work plan hasn't changed from the last time we met. So we have our last meeting of the municipal year on the 31st of March. We'll be receiving an update on the adaptation and mitigation plan, and I'm still expecting to have our update report on the waste strategy. So I look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you ever so much for your contributions today.
Oh, Chair, and there's also the annual report 24-25.
And our annual report, there we are. So you can look forward to reading that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye, Beck. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.